Good evening. You joined me the day after the engine install day. So this is the first video since the time lapse. I'll give you a close-up of the engine for the first time. It's quite a bit of the plumbing's done, quite a bit still to go. Connected a few of the loom connections and whatever else, but again, still some work to do. Throttle cables kind of roughly mapped out. Boom, boom. But yeah, so still some work to do up in the engine bay, but you know, the kind of stuff that we needed many hands for is hopefully done on that front. Spent the last hour or so of the engine install day playing around with the rear diff. It's one of the things you'll read about and hear about a lot if you're building a Caterham. It's mainly because the thing's so heavy, it weighs a ton, so getting it lined up is, when you're supporting that weight, is not the easiest. But we had to play around with a few things last night, and some of them, even though they're just not in yet, I can tell already are pretty good things to bear in mind, pretty good tips. So I'll document them here, and then if they turn out to be nonsense, then after I've fitted the diff, I'll come back and correct myself. So the first thing is, this is a BMW differential, the badge on. I think the legacy, you know, for years and years, Caterham's used a Sierra diff. So the dimensions and the bolt pattern and stuff are obviously different. So what the BMW diff comes with is this cradle to effectively adapt it out to the dimensions of the Sierra diff. So this is what we want to be bolting to the car, and the diff bolts into this. Now that's, even with this adapter, it's too narrow for the bracket. So what that's bolting into, excuse me, is this chassis here. So you can see there's these two bushes up here, and then two threaded holes down at the bottom, and then of course it will mate up with the prop shaft. Quick note on the handbrake cable. So in the chassis, there's a nice little, where's the focus? There it is. There's a nice little bracket which looks fairly standard for like a handbrake cable. So the initial thought was to wind the adjuster sleeve, this thing, into that gap there. But when we did the first test fit of the diff, we found that was fouling on the cradle. This was fouling on the cradle, and we couldn't get the diff up into position. It was only later when we realised, on the cradle there's another slot there, so the adjuster comes way back, is my only assumption. The manual is just so ambiguous for this. It basically has a picture of a diff, a picture of a pile of washers, and that's it. So where the washers come in, they are effectively shims. So once we've got the diff in place, we need to centre it. And there's nothing in the manual to say what you're centering against. So the general consensus is to clamp some edges, so I'm going to use a couple of spirit levels, clamp them to this square section of chassis here, there, and then say on the other side, and then basically find the centre, so get an equal gap between the diff and each side. That seems to be the done thing. I think within 5mm of centre you're aiming for, but you know, you should be able to get it bang on with the shims. You get a bunch of shims of various thicknesses, so should be able to get that bang on. So most people do this with the diff and the cradle attached. The cradle comes pre-attached to the diff, but it's a lot of work while you're figuring out the shim situation. So something, I didn't think of it myself. I read it on some blog or watched it on YouTube. Sorry, I can't remember the link or anything. But the chap building that car just took the cradle off, and that allowed him to get the spacing right with just the cradle in place, which makes a lot of sense, because once you've figured out what shims you need at either side, then all you do, you can either take the cradle back out, bolt it to the diff, and then put the whole thing in with the noted down number of shims, or potentially leave the cradle bolted up and then jack the diff up into the cradle. Not sure if that'll work. I might as well try it. It comes without oil in it. Apparently it is quite difficult to get the oil in. Or difficult is probably a strong word, but it's slightly easier to get the oil in while the diff's off the car. I'm assuming that's the fill plug. I might do that. Now. Put the diff oil in. Then at least it's done. It's only 800ml, I think, so it's not going to make it much heavier. So yeah, I'm probably not going to do much of this tonight because it's pretty late already. I've just been tidying the garage after the activity of yesterday. But I might at least get those spirit levels clamped on and see what that looks like. So yeah, I'll report back later. Okay, welcome back. So just doing a little bit of measuring. This is the second cheapest laser measure thing on Amazon, so I'll probably calibrate with something else, but I've taken a few. I've got the cage in. Got to be honest, even just the cage on its own, it was a tough boy to get in. Like the big ball, the big 11-inch ball that goes right across, could not get it in that way, but could get it in that way. Actually, there is a good tip from I got it from Richard, aka Maverick. So thanks for that one. That bolt's actually not straight, which sounds weird, but that huge, great big bolt is very slightly angled, which means it's kind of only got one orientation where it'll smoothly go through the diff and the two bushes. But even with that in mind, it was quite tough to get that in. Anyway, so once it's in, it doesn't freely shunt side to side. I just feel like the whole thing is slightly out of tolerance. If everything was straight and perfectly lined up, that in theory now, this whole assembly should rattle backwards and forwards quite easily because it's just bolts in bushes, right? But it doesn't. So it will move with the help of the mallet. So what I've done is I've shunted it back and forth a little bit, and I've got these spirit levels clamped to either chassis rail to give me something to measure from. And what I've also done is I've taken a second measurement from this around here, between those two rivets on each side, and I get the same measurement side to side. So I'm fairly happy that A, that it's centered, and B, I now know what my reference measurements need to be. So I now need to take all these bolts out, figure out how many shims I need to get in these gaps, so that when it all gets torqued up, it's roughly in this. Well, it is in this same alignment. So going back to my earlier point about whether I do that with the cradle in or not, I'm now beginning to doubt whether it's a good idea, because this whole assembly does have a little bit of flex in it. Whereas if it was bolted to the diff, it would be a lot more robust. So maybe I do need to be taking these measurements with the diff inside the cradle. But it can't hurt to get close like this, and then I can put the diff in, and if it's just off a little bit, I know it'll just be one or two shims either way. So anyway, I'll report back probably tomorrow now, because I can't be bothered messing with the diff now. Okay, one last update for tonight. So these are the 3 sizes of shims you get, and then the 4 lock washers for later. So we've got thick ones, medium ones, and then little tiny thin shims over here. So what I've been doing is I've been under the car. I've got 2 reference points now. So I've got it's 299mm to, I say 2 rivets, but there's just a slot between 2 rivets. I can put my laser measure so it's consistent on each side, and then it's 319.5 to where the spirit levels are mounted on each side. So, and what I've done is with just the cage in place underneath, I've worked out that this side needs 2 thick washers, this one needs 2 medium and a thin, this one 3 medium, and this one 2 thick, 1 medium and 1 thin. And with those washers all wedged in place, the cage holds itself in there with no bolts in. So that tells me it's pretty flush. And while still being able to get them in, there's no side-to-side movement on it. So I really do need to go to bed. So tomorrow I'm going to bolt the cradle in without the diff, with all of those shims, take all my measurements again, make sure everything checks out. And if that's the case, I'll then gauge the viability of jacking this up into the cradle, or whether the cradle needs to come back down again. I won't know really until I try it. probably safer to use a second pair of hands for that. A lot of the YouTube videos and stuff that I've watched for the non-racing cars, they just take this front bit of boot panel out. I mean, I could do. It's only just moving the extinguisher out of the way. It's got... I don't know. I just don't think I want to play with that. So what they would do is they would then drop the engine crane down through here and use that to pull the diff up, but I just don't fancy it. I don't fancy messing around with that extinguisher, so I'm going to, I'll just do the trolley jack version, which probably means I'll need to grab a helping hand, but we'll see how it goes. Anyway, for now, good night. Good evening, really quick one. We're a +1 evening. I'm not having much time in the garage tonight. I'm pretty tired from the weekend, so. But what I have done is I have bolted the cradle up with the shims that I measured out. I've not torqued the bolts up yet because my torque wrench is in the car, ready for yet another Lotus track day tomorrow. And yeah, the measurements all still work out to my reference points, so I'm happy that's centered now. The only thing I'm not sure about now is whether the diff will slide into that cradle or not, because obviously, I don't know, obviously I'm talking rubbish. It should go in, but it's pretty heavy. I've just lumping it around the garage, I'm pretty out of breath, so I'll come back and do that another day when I've got some help. Might get on with some other stuff in the meantime, so I don't know, maybe we'll call this video here because it's been a long one on the diff as it is, and we'll just add that as a bonus feature to a future video. We'll see. Anyway, track day later this week at Silverstone in the Lotus, so kind of all eyes on that for now. My last one of the year, unless I can get out in this car before Christmas, which will be nice. For now, probably back to finishing Jake's plumbing off. Will be the next steps until I get another pair of hands with the diff. Check back later.